The year I turned 18, I broke an old lady's ribs. I stabbed a man in the lungs. She threw up in my mouth. I was a paramedic and firefighter in training, and I was horrible at it. I wasn't horrible because I broke an old lady's ribs while giving her CPR. I was horrible at it because I almost didn't do those things. Because my sense of empathy, even though I didn't know that word, was so strong that the very idea of hurting another person in order to save them. And we had a saying in my fire department that was, hesitate and the patient is lost. At the time, my fire department was very heavily male, as you can see from this photo, and I didn't see anyone else around me who was experiencing what I was experiencing. No one else was hesitating. No one else seemed to be struggling with this idea of saving someone else by hurting them. I went to my teacher, and I explained the problem that I was having. And my teacher said to me, "You will never be a good paramedic. Your heart is too big. You care too much. You need to learn to be an asshole." I was a kid, I was 18. I thought then that adults knew everything. Of course, now I know better, but at the time I thought, great, I'm gonna learn how to become good at my job. That didn't work very well. As it turns out, it's very hard to learn how to be an asshole. And this was pre-internet, and so it was even how to be an asshole. And so I kept trying to shut myself off and become callous and not care about my patients. And they found that that didn't work. That didn't make me a better paramedic. It made me a worse one. And so instead, I started writing down my feelings. I started writing down the pain I felt every time I had to hurt a patient to heal them, or every time we lost a patient. I started writing down the pain that my patients were experiencing, what I saw as we showed up at their house when they were unexpected in the middle of their life and they were experiencing trauma. And the more I did this, the more I started looking at my fire crew and realizing that they too were experiencing pain. I just hadn't known how to see it. And so I would go back and I would write their pain as well, and I would write down these things. And so we would go on this call and I would do my job, and then I would come back to the fire station and I would sit by myself in the corner and I would scribble these notes about pain. That all changed one day. We had a fire call in the middle of the afternoon. It was to a place that commonly had false alarms. And when we had a false alarm, we would send the fire trucks out, and then the ambulance would follow. Not because we expected anything to go wrong, but because it was protocol. So the fire trucks went out to the false alarm, we in the ambulance followed. And as we were driving, we thought, gosh, I can't wait till they call the all clear and turn us around and we can go have lunch. And we were talking about all the places to go have lunch. And then on the radio, the dispatcher said, "The house is on fire. There are 3 children inside. Hurry." And the weird thing about this is there are codes in the fire department, and they give you the code for what's happening, and they don't say words like hurry or children inside. And so it was this moment that changed my life. As I was going through my slides to come up with this talk, I was realizing that I had saved the newspaper article there on the left of that experience. That's how much it had impacted me. And on the right, you can see the sort of more light-hearted elements of being a paramedic. But I had cut out this article from the newspaper and had saved it in my scrapbook. And that was also the first time that I wrote a poem about being a paramedic. And so I went back after that call and I wrote this poem. It's called Response Time. When the siren wails the 3rd time that day, we think it's another false alarm. Rise slowly from our chairs, slide into our coats and boots, let the truck rumble warm before we pull from the safety of the station. We rest our helmets in our laps while the dispatcher's voice crackles over the radio like wet paper. We lean in to hear him say, "Hurry, hurry." But we are too late to the scene. Everything that is flammable has flamed. And we scatter with hatches, with hoses, with sinking hearts thinking, if only, until the man comes running, offering salvation in the form of his small, still sun, and we go down on our knees in the gravel. We are sure we will save him as we slip aside the wafer of his tongue and force our hope into the darkness of his lungs, pressure his heart into running blood beneath our fingers, but only beneath our fingers. Back at the station, we discard our blackened coats like husks, and the sting of wet wood swarms against our skin and settles in our hair like a legion of bees. We go down on our hands and knees, scrubbing the trucks until they glisten red. No one mentions the boy, but he is everywhere, kneeling beside us, lighting fires upon our flesh. That poem eventually became a book of poems that I wrote to save you. Probably should have been called Learning to Save Me, because that's what I was doing, was finding a way to channel my really deep empathy in a way that allowed me to do my job. The poem and the collection that it was in went on to win a fellowship and kind of kicked off my poetry career. But more importantly, it taught me the power of creative empathy. And creative empathy is a thing that I think we don't talk about enough, and it is the tool, I think, in every writer's and creator's toolbox, every gamer, every role player, every actor. That empathy is not something to be set aside. While you are failing at the thing you are doing, empathy is not a mistake. Empathy is, in fact, the core of everything that we do as creative beings. In short, empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of others. This wasn't a word I knew when I was 18. I just felt, which is sort of how you are as a teenager. I think everything is feeling. And eventually you get the word and you get the definition, and it starts to kind of coalesce into a thing. And so when we talk about empathy, we talk about stepping into the shoes of someone else, seeing through the eyes of someone else, experiencing the experiences of someone else. And why is this so important as a creator? It doesn't matter whether you make stories or movies or games or characters, or you're just playing as a 6-year-old in the sandbox and making things. It's important for so many reasons, and I'm going to just talk about 3 of them. When we talk about story, we talk about why we connect to a story. So why do some stories give us connection? Some stories leave us flat. Why do we love some villains and some we can't really understand their motivations? Why is Hannibal such a fantastic human being while being so horrible at the same time? How do you do that? My answer is creative empathy. And here are the 3, I think, most important parts of creative empathy. What does the person need to know, and when do they need to know it? This is a thing that I think we don't think about when we watch stories. But when we watch stories and we get the information in a certain order, that's really purposeful. That is the person creating the story stepping into your eyes, your shoes, and saying, what do they need to know and when do they need to know it? 2 great examples are this presentation. I was going to start out with the poem. And then I thought, there's no context. They won't know what I'm talking about. There will be no emotional reaction unless I give them the story first. And so in the end, I chose to do story and then poem. Does it work? We don't know. You can only try. But the thinking about it is the important part. The other part that relates really closely to creativity is I come from a poetry background, and then I come from a story background, and then I started working in game design. And my very first adventure that I wrote like I was writing a story. And I put all the important information at the very end, because that's how you lead the reader along in your story. That's how you make it enticing. And I turned my adventure over to Monty Cook, who was the developer at the time, and he said, why is all the information that matters in the back? You're writing this like it's a story. And I thought, well, nobody's going to read it if I don't make it enticing. How are they, if I put all that stuff in the front, they're not going to read it. And he said, think about what your GM needs. Think about what players need, and then go from there. And so that was a huge moment for me. I stepped into the player's mind and thought, what does the GM need to know? When do they need to know it? And the same thing with readers, whether it's poetry, whether it's a story, whether it's a movie. You know, if you've had that experience where you're watching a movie and you're going, what is going on? Someone just tell me what is happening. Sci-fi is notorious for this. On the other side, you get sci-fi where they info dump you for the first 20 minutes with a voiceover, and you're utterly bored. You're like, please stop, I don't need to know all these things. So, creative empathy. Number 1, what does the person need to know? When do they need to know it? Number 2, respecting others' time and attention. This talk is supposed to be 18 minutes or less. Will I make it? I don't know, but I'm going to try. Will I keep you engaged? I don't know, but I'm going to try. Will you leave having learned something? I don't know, but I'm going to try. So this is the most important thing. You guys are busy. You have social media. You're a Gen Con. You have 1 million other things that you could be doing, but you are here, and I respect that. I look at you and I say, you have all these choices. You have all these obligations. How can I make what I am doing worth your time? If I don't tell me. And the last one is empathy is the key to innovation. This one's so important. I am a 46-year-old white woman, bisexual, grew up in the United States. This is my story, right? This is what I know how to tell. I was a paramedic, I was a firefighter, I was a poet, I've worked as a bartender. I've got all these stories, they're mine. Now, I step into someone else's shoes. I say, what was their life like? What do they love? What's important to them? What do they fear? What do they hate? Who hurts them? What do they really want out of their lives? And suddenly I can write stories that are way beyond me. I can write stories that are human stories that are deeply ingrained in our humanity. And so empathy, being able to say, who is this character? Who is this person? Who is this family? What do they love? What do they fear? Is so important to creative empathy. It's such a useful tool. It's also important to being a human being, but I think we all know that. So I'm going to focus on the creative part. So being able to just step outside yourself, outside your own experiences, and sometimes this involves talking to someone else. Sometimes it involves reading and doing research. Sometimes it just involves sitting with your own fears and saying, how is that person different from me? What don't I understand about them, and how can I come to understand it? These are just 3 of the ways in which I think creative empathy makes us better creators, better gamers, better humans, just sort of better all-around beings. But empathy, that willingness to sink deeply into someone else's psychology and try to understand them, that's so scary. We have to see the darkness in other human beings if we're willing to do that. That's what happened to me when I was 18. I had to accept that I was the kind of human being who would hurt another human being in order to save them. And boy, I had trouble reconciling that. That was really hard. And the way that I did that, by remembering that empathy also brings us the light. It brings us the joy. It brings us all of those moments where our humanity connects with another person's humanity. And that makes all the difference. But the most important, in my opinion, thing about empathy is it allows us to tell stories and make games and create experiences that bring the essence of humanity into the light. And these are the experiences, these are the moments that break down barriers, that transcend time, that go over and beyond walls. They're the experiences that change us, that live on forever beside us, eternally, lighting fires upon our flesh. Thank you.